I'm Dan Levitin. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Psychology and in Music at McGill.
And I'm Douglas Eck. I'm an assistant professor in computer science at the University of Montreal. And we both work together at Kermit.
The project that we're involved in is known by various names. One of them is called Shazam, which was a project name on a grant. But really what it's all about is being able to make better, higher quality recommendations of music to consumers, and to be able to sonically fingerprint sound files so that we are able to retrieve some attributes from them. We've been working on this somewhat independently before we met up, and we just concluded a project together. It was funded by NSERC in part with a couple of industrial partners. In the broadest strokes, the idea was to combine some music information retrieval technology with some research in how people form their musical preferences and add some kind of a front end to it so that people could access what will hopefully be an enormous database eventually of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of songs, an interface that will allow the average person to navigate their way through preference space in order to find new music that they like, based on a number of features that are both music-centered and individual-centered.
Imagine someone comes to you with an iPod full of music, and they select 20 songs from that iPod that for them have some similarity. And they say to you, all right, if you guys are so smart, I've chosen 20 and it's the beginning of my music list for my dinner party, you go off and choose the next 2,000. As it turns out, this is musically a deep problem. It's a deep problem because the idea of music similarity runs deep. We may not know a priori why the person chose these 20 songs out of maybe their database of 5,000 songs. And if there isn't an obvious regularity in terms of the bands that they've chosen or the genre from the genre tags that are easily available from the MP3s, we may be left with what is actually kind of an interesting problem. How can we extract features from the music directly from the audio? How can we look inside of the audio such that we can pull out some data that we can use to try to decide what other songs in the same database are similar? If we can solve that problem, then we can talk about what Dan's talking about, which is actually recommending music to people. So the database is no longer your iPod. The database is some company's huge database of music, and they track your listening preferences, and then they say, hey, we know you like this other music, you'll probably like this one too. And the question of why would you like this one over the 10 gazillion other songs available in the universe is sort of the question we're trying to address.
And ultimately, we're building mathematical models of this preference space. So, or another way to look at it is similarity space. Some songs are similar to others, some songs are less similar, and the mathematical model reduces everything to equations and numbers in matrices, which means that ultimately the technology should be transferable to other domains, such as films, books, restaurants, any, even choices of friends, any kind of thing where there would be similarities and dissimilarities. Now, one of the things about musical similarity, so far as we know, there are at least 60 dimensions on which songs can be compared to one another. Not all 60 dimensions are going to be important for every listener at every time of their lives, but the model has to be able to accommodate at least 60 dimensions in order to work.
The project was initially called Shazam, and it has since become a website called Radio Libre. We can find it online at radiolibre.ca, and it's a website there to recommend music to listeners, and our algorithms are running behind Radio Libre. It's the core of Radio Libre, responsible for learning from a user something about their preferences and mapping those preferences onto the preferences of other users, such that as someone uses this online radio station for a while, the radio station learns what they like and plays for them more and more of what they like.
One of Kermit's mandates is to understand the nature of sound from a psychological perspective or perceptual tradition, which involves cognitive psychology, cognitive neuroscience, and so on, classic experimental psychology. And in understanding similarities between musical objects and preferences therein, we're invoking prototype theory, classic cognitive psychology concepts such as categorization. We're using multidimensional scaling as a tool. Really, it sits in the heart of the pursuit of questions about how people form categories about things in the world and how people distinguish things in the world.
Another part of Kermit's mandate is the axis of research involving music information retrieval. So by this we mean the ability to extract one representation of music from another one. For example, maybe we have some old vinyl discs and we want to extract the music, so for particularly damaged discs, we may need to use special technology for that. We also might be looking at different ways to browse or to search large databases of music stored electronically, whether that be musical scores or actually audio. And so you can see right away, I suppose, when you start to talk about large databases of music and making recommendations from those databases, one axis, one component of this research, which is part of Kermit's mandate, is to handle this interaction between different formats and different representations of music.
As I understand, Kermit's global mandate is the scientific study of sound. Everything from the process of composing music to recording it, performing it, playing it, reproducing it, all the way up to the listener. So we're dealing with everything from the brain of the composer through the brains and fingers of musicians, and then back to the ears and brains of listeners. And this falls squarely within that because we're dealing with questions about selection of what people choose to hear, and also larger issues about how things are similar, whether composers intended them to be similar or not. We're continuing, I think, somewhat independently and somewhat collaboratively to pursue ways of improving the system. I know in my lab we're continuing to look at better ways to satisfy a quick probe type of interaction where, as Doug said, with the smallest number of songs possible, we can bootstrap into being able to place you into some region of this multidimensional space with high accuracy. We're working very hard on that, and I guess you're continuing to work on the information retrieval aspect.
So in our group, we're continuing to look at the problem of extracting the appropriate features from music. So if you think about an audio signal, it's simply a value that's changing over time that that exactly describes the movement of a loudspeaker. These numbers don't help us very much directly in predicting music similarity. So what we do is some signal processing transformations where we try to extract some features from the music that make some sense. And we're happy to say last year our group won an international contest on predicting musical genre from audio. And we're continuing that research in the context of Radio Libre to incorporate some of this work as a third generation of Radio Libre that takes better advantage of this research. So that's the direction we're going in.